You're listening to the Reinventing Education podcast. Middle school doesn't have to be something we all just survive. It can be one of the most exciting, transformative stages of growing up. In this episode, we sit down with Chris Balme, author of Challenge Accepted, to explore a new vision for the middle school years. Instead of dreading this time, what if we embraced it as a season for real-world adventures, big questions, and discovering what we're capable of? Chris will share with you why middle schoolers are wildly underrated and how the right kinds of challenges can unlock their courage, curiosity, and confidence. All right, Chris. So you've got a new book out, Challenge Accepted, 50 Adventures to Make Middle School Awesome. I guess before we get into some of the details of the book, what drew you to write it or what inspired you and what maybe some of the challenges are, for someone who might be new to you, maybe give us the brief Chris Balme bio, what you've done in education and how you've gotten here.
Oh boy. Okay. I will give it my best shot. I think the brief bio still has to start in middle school as the dazed and confused and bored and isolated middle schooler that I was. And as someone who thought, like most middle schoolers, at least in the US, well, this is absolutely normal. I must be doing it right because I'm kind of miserable. And only much, much later, after I finished K-12, swore I would never set foot in a school again, did it occur to me that it's an odd story that we tell, and this will connect, I promise, to the book, that we tell kids at one of the most pivotal moments of their lives that this is going to suck, and I hope you get through it not too traumatized. It's the lowest imaginable bar for a time that we know from every perspective, sociologically, neurologically, is one of the most fruitful periods of the human lifespan. So at some point, that notion popped into my head. I decided I wanted to work in education. So I've spent the last 20, closing in on 25 years working with middle schoolers, different ways as a teacher, school founder, principal, working with kids who are dropping out, working in private schools, international schools. And I still think, there is something powerful about changing the story. That if we as a society got better at welcoming kids into adolescence and could meet them where they are, understand them developmentally, we would be healthier, they would be happier, all of us would be a lot better off. So sorry, that was not a short bio, but that's the best I could do.
Well, there's a lot in there. Well, and I guess as the natural bridge from that to your new book, Challenge Accepted, I'm a huge fan of your work. I'm a big fan of Finding the Magic in Middle School, your previous book, and maybe give us the quick Coles Notes version on how you address those themes you just discussed, how we tend to completely miss the magic in this phase of life. And like you said, just kind of avert your eyes, muscle through it. You're not the easy to deal with primary school. You're not the near adult of the tail end of high school. Let's just get through this awkward middle phase. Can you share us a little bit about, what the magic of middle school really is?
Yeah, absolutely. I think a key beginning is to understand that there are two periods in the human lifespan of peak brain growth. Those are 0 to 5, early childhood, and 11 to 16, early adolescence. And it's no coincidence, those are the two hardest times to be someone's parent because they're changing so fast that what worked today won't work next week. The phase that you finally made sense of, that means that phase is about to be over. When we think about the 0 to 5 years, we have all kinds of developmental maps that help us make sense of it. Otherwise, when our toddler starts saying no to everything, we might think we've done something terribly wrong. It's our fault. We're terrible parents. And, we would be quickly confused and overwhelmed. But we don't have those maps for early adolescent years, where the same intense changes from one phase to the next are happening. And we're likely to take it personally if we don't have the ability to predict them. So the whole essence of that book is to say there's great developmental research out there, but for some reason it's not widely shared. And a lot of us parents or teachers just when our kids or students reach this age and they start doing things that are not what we expected. So the idea of that book is when we know what's going on developmentally, then we can meet those needs. And then you find that middle schoolers are actually awesome humans. They are not the kind of grouchy, sleepy, resistant stereotype. That's what happens when we are blocking them and they're not able to do the things that are developmentally important. When we know that territory, we know that they are hypersocial for a good reason and they need lots of time to be social. We know that they're doing identity experiments, and it's not to piss us off. It's to figure out who they are and what passions they can bring. And we know that they demand relevance, that if what we're asking them to do is a worksheet and it feels like babysitting, they are too smart to put up with that. So when we factor those things in, they turn into wonderful people, which is what they've always been, but it's, we get to enjoy them in a more natural state. Uh, so that's what the first book is about. And then that took me to want to write one for middle schoolers themselves.
Tell us about that one because, yeah, reading Finding Magic in Middle School is a very good setup for a parent, a teacher, for us to try and get our heads around those developmental kind of stages and belonging, achievement, and authenticity. Those are the kind of stages they go through. And it was really helpful for me to kind of get my head around. But this is for the middle schoolers. And we've still got some work to do to allow them to do these things, like you say. But what is the core of the book? What kind of ideas are running through it?
Yeah, so the way I hope the book will be received is kind of like a set of tickets. And these are tickets to all kinds of destinations. Some you've already been to, some not interesting to you, but hopefully some of them really draw you out and there's something there for you. Maybe it's, something that's a little scary, like starting your own business. Oh my gosh, am I even allowed to do that? And yes, you are. Or rescuing an animal. Maybe it's one that's just more playful. Like one of them is to create the ultimate obstacle course and test it on your friends. So, the essence of it is middle schoolers are capable of a lot more than people give them credit for. So this is a set of ideas, for wherever you might be as a middle schooler. And you can make them your own, choose your own adventure style, and have some more choice, have some more agency. Discover maybe that the story about you is not entirely true, that you're not a grouchy hormonal, tween or teen, but actually a capable person, which is what, PS middle schoolers have been for pretty much all of history until school was invented. Capable humans doing things in the world.
Yeah, and I like that you've gone from your first book laying out a very conceptual framework for us to wrap our heads around, and now you've got a series of choose your own adventure activities to okay, here's how you apply this. So I'm kind of curious, with 50 of these, can you give us the idea of the genesis of where some of these came from? Are these tried and tested Chris Balme things? Are these things you've drawn from the research of others? Were there some that got cut that didn't make the list of 50? I'm kind of curious how you got to the 50 challenges here.
Oh yeah, it's actually been through a ridiculous number of iterations, but the beginning of it, so well, let's see, 12 years ago now, started the process of founding Millennium School in San Francisco with a small team. And the essence of that school was to try to recreate the idea of middle school with as much of a fresh view on it as we can, bringing lots of research and university partners in. And in the course of it, early on, we kept feeling like we're accidentally defaulting to what we all grew up with, which is let's do the usual academics in a more creative way. That was kind of the most creative we felt. And at some point we realized we're still trapped. And one of the ways out of that was developmental map. But another way was this idea, we started creating this matrix on one of the walls of what if we had no academic curriculum at all and the entire curriculum, quote unquote, of the school were experiences? What would those experiences be? So we started asking friends, thinking ourselves, when you look back on this part of your life, adolescence, especially early adolescence, what are the things that are still positive kind of character building or affirming things, even when you look back, years or decades later? And that's how the list began. All kinds of crazy things, the time that I stood up for friends, the time that someone thought my art was cool and it wasn't just my mom, the time that I made an entire meal, for someone else. So we added to the list. Then we turned it into a deck of cards. We started kind of randomly giving people the cards and playing with them. Some of them were great, some of them weren't great. So it's just gradually evolved. I started a program called Argonaut, which I can say more about, which is kind of an online advisory program. And then we tested it there for years, 5 years actually of testing, much of it during the pandemic when everyone was stuck trying to figure out what do we do, what can still feel meaningful. So it's gone through a lot of iterations. Probably 2/3 of them have been there from the very start, and then some coming and going as we evolve it.
Yeah, I'm a structures guy in many ways, and I was looking through them and I noticed they were different colors. And I looked through the stuff on your Argonaut site, and it seems to be under banner headings such as independence, connection, and so on. So, is that kind of how you're kind of making some sense of how these things might come together to a more holistic kind of growth?
A little bit. It's funny you raised that. So I use that to help categorize in my own head, but I wanted the book to be as simple as possible to just jump right in and not feel like you have to wade through preambles and structures. So there's almost none of that in the book. There's a very short introduction. There's a top secret last chapter. There's a bone that is thrown to parents and teachers at the very end to make sense of what this book is. But everything else in the book is just 50 short chapters, everything from how do you forgive someone to how do you go camping, to how could you become an apprentice, very focused on practicalities. So you can jump right to something that speaks to you and run with it.
But it clearly, if a kid is going through a lot of this experience, it clearly does get that more kind of rounded approach, and there's definitely a balance to them. It very much brought to mind. I don't know if you've ever seen the guy John Taylor Gatto, and he did that 14 Principles of Elite Private Schools. And I was racking my brain. I was like, what was this called? And I was looking through it. They're very, very different to yours, of course, but it's a similar kind of very positive way. And he was middle school as well. I don't know. I'm not going anywhere with this. I was just bringing it up because. But is there
I love that
anything
you
like
mentioned
that?
it.
Yeah. Does there anything
Oh,
like that
yeah.
feed into your kind of thinking?
For sure. I'm honored that you mentioned this in the same breath as I got to know him, years ago when he was still alive, and reading his book, Dumbing Us Down, was absolutely that expanded my perception, probably radicalized me in some ways to how strange schools are. I think we put it
Yeah.
that way. The things that we take as normal are really quite bizarre. And he's a wonderful, he was so effective at poking at schools and pointing out those ridiculous qualities. And yeah, I hope he would appreciate this kind of book that's, okay, we can all agree school is pretty weird, but we don't need another book on that. There have been some great ones already. Let's
Yeah.
focus on what we could actually do.
Absolutely.
So the Kickstarter, Chris, for people who want to get a copy, I believe the Kickstarter has been successfully funded. Are people able to make late contributions to that, or will people now wait till August to get their hands on the book?
Yes, indeed. We'll keep it running until August when it's hopefully widely available. But yeah, we're continuing to get the word out there, and I hope that we can build up some momentum before it's widely available.
And part of the reason I wanted to ask about that, I don't know if I'm allowed to talk about this, but as someone who, full transparency, was a supporter of your book, I was thrilled to receive an email a few weeks after making my pledge for the book to find out that I wouldn't be receiving one copy. I'd be receiving 2 copies. At least that was for the early folks. And your challenge to us was, keep a copy for yourself. And then the other copy, go hide this somewhere or go put it in some kind of a place for someone else to stumble upon and hopefully have an adventure. That's one of the coolest Kickstarter ideas that I've seen floating around there. What's your desire or motivation, your hope for this book when it comes in contact with the life of someone in middle school?
I'm so glad to hear that you enjoyed that. And honestly, I think part of the writing of this book was me trying to release let go of the parts of my brain that have become used to writing to adults and writing curriculum and writing boring emails. Enough of that. I think I'm inviting more of a trickster spirit into my own life it feels more authentic and vital. And one of my favorite parts of the chapters in this book is the challenge to be a stealth artist, which basically gives tips on how you can secretly leave your art in public places and hopefully ways that are not non-damaging, but that play with that trickster spirit. And so that was the intent here. And I'll continue doing that for the late pledges as well. That if someone buys a physical copy of the book, I'm going to send them two, and hope that second one just has legs and walks out into the world on its own. And you can assist that by leaving it in a cafe or wherever, it might be happened upon. So that's I think part of the inspiration for this book too is the Teenage Liberation Handbook, which you may know, an amazing book that is also full of practical ideas for how to get yourself out of excessive schoolishness, you could say. And that's also a book that people stumble upon. It's left in a hostel or on a random part of a cafe. And I hope this one will be stumbled upon too.
One of the things you kind of mentioned is that, the question of what if this contents of the book were the real work of middle school, and this is what the middle school curriculum could be. How do we kind of start moving in that direction? What do we have to do about ourselves as teachers and establishments to be able to make this possible?
There's the big question. Well, I hope this will, secretly start working on us by virtue of kids putting it to use. I do kind of think we should create one for us as adults. Maybe that will be part two. But I guess that, perhaps more practical answer to the question is that schools are not only places that are isolating and frustrating for kids, but they often are for adults too. So when we make them more humane places for us, where we can be tricksters, if that's what speaks to us, using that energy, or creative, authentic, playful in our own ways, that's also part of how it shifts for kids. So there's so much more to say about how one might engineer that and release ourselves from some of the pressure of thinking that if we don't cram all of this content in, we have, poorly served our students. I think the trickster spirit of this book, I hope, is what we can add into the mix more than any additional piece of content.
And Chris, I'm curious if we can tie this into some of your current work you are doing in schools. So we had actually spoke to you at the genesis of our podcast nearly 6, almost 7 years ago, discussing your work in the Millennium School, which you've briefly touched on today. Curious if you can fill us in a little bit on the work that you're doing sort of remotely as part of the school leadership team at a school in Japan, and around the human flourishing curriculum and some of the things you're tying in together in your school there, and how it may in some ways overlap with the work in your book.
Yeah, thank you. It's been such a fun and unexpected twist in my own life to be in Japan, where I'm speaking to you from now. And, Millennium School, I was there for 7 years, stepped down in 2020 thinking, I've had my adventure of leading a school and on to other adventures, hopefully more time in parenthood, which I've been able to enjoy. But then an opportunity came knocking, which I could never have expected, which was to help start a new school, but be part of a team rather than a sole school leader, so that it could be a more sustainable, kind of humane position, which is, I think, this is a different conversation, but one of the real design flaws in schools is also the way they burn out people in leadership roles or push them into kind of non-empathetic postures. So to make a very long story short, amazing founder Tomoko Kusamoto of this school, Hakuba International School, approached me to help it get off the ground as part of that team. And, I couldn't say no to it. It's such a cool opportunity to build a brand new international school in a village of 8,000 people in rural Japan that would bring kids from all over the world to have a truly different school experience, and to be a lab school. Part of her vision has been to create a teachers college, and we're kind of taking our first baby steps toward that with conferences and workshops, to be a place where people can come and see something different. And, much like chapters in this book, they might say, that is not for me, and that's fine. But there are a lot of educators out there who want to do things differently and already have clear intuition about it, but need to get some reinforcement, maybe some specific tools or to feel part of something. So that's what we're up to. More specifically, some of the aspects in the human flourishing curriculum, which is kind of how we're packaging this all together. It's based around projects, so it's a project-based learning school. It's based around the outdoors, so we're in the mountains. Students spend 4 weeks a year camping at every season, including in the middle of winter, which is definitely for the adventurous. It's also based around social emotional learning through advisory, which has become an area I'm really more passionate about by the day. And last but not least, we're trying to really play with ideas of systems thinking, and been working with Peter Senge at MIT around his model called the compassionate systems framework, which is kind of a blend of these really interesting intellectual tools mixed with emotional intelligence. So sorry, that was a mouthful. There's much more to say about all of those, but those are the ingredients we're working with in this soup.
And Chris, I'm going to step out now for the next 8 hours because Brendan will want to dig deep into every single topic you've brought up there.
Excellent.
Well,
please
yeah.
do.
I mean, the thing is that, and I don't know how much you want to speak on this because you've said a lot, and I know there's so much more you can say. But what is the this is a huge question. What is the transformational potential of all of these things that you're doing? The book and these kind of experiential and project-based, inquiry-based pedagogies. Yeah, what is the benefit of us doing these things?
At the heart, I think it keeps the curiosity and playfulness alive. It has the potential to. It's far from perfect. No school works for everyone.
Yeah.
But, I know back to my own schooling that I was really deeply unhappy, and that it was absolutely normal to feel that way. And I left it thinking, that was awful, more or less.
Yeah.
And many of my friends felt the same way. And, I'm still many decades later working on unpacking, processing that, and using it to fuel what I do now. But I don't think that's how it has to be. So everything in this school is just kind of representing our best knowledge, guesses about how to make it not that, make it a place where kids are creative and vital and have agency and are not so stressed out and so kind of zombified by all of the machinery. That's the hope.
Yeah, it's such the middle schools that I've worked with and experienced is kind of like Robert kind of alluded to earlier. It's almost preparation for your high school in many ways, but you can't act on it. You're in high school at least, and like you're saying, you're almost there. You can see the light at the end of the tunnel, and you're starting to explore and ask. But middle school sometimes feels like this little kind of in between thing when all the teachers in there, so many great middle school teachers and really trying within this kind of really strict kind of framework. I guess this is really just a way of saying that, I'm inspired by what you're saying, and it's the idea of continuing to work, and I work with middle school teachers a lot, and just trying to find those opportunities to bring those inquiries and you talk about underestimating kids, right? And it's kind of, making sure that we have high expectations of their capacity. And it's just so much more difficult because of the changes that they're undergoing as well. Because I work a lot with, early childhood, and it's kind of like you said, they're going through such dramatic change. We kind of don't know how to deal with that. And also on top of that, build a curriculum that kind of feels like it's doing what it should do. I like the way you're framing it. Well, let's make a better story because I think
Mm.
that can help for sure. I know none of that was a question in any sense, but how
Uh,
does the
yeah.
Argonaut kind of project fit into this stuff?
Yeah. One quick response to what you shared, which I love, and then I'll go to Argonaut, which is this is going to sound naive and foolish, and there are many criticisms one could make of it. But I think one way to sum up much of what I believe more and more is just that we can trust kids. You know, worth saying again, I think like kids are trustworthy. And so if they tell you school sucks, they're probably right. And when they are drawn to a certain thing, to play, to spend time with a friend, it's probably the best learning that their brain has available. So it's a simplistic answer, but it sums up a lot. It at
Yeah.
least helps me in my own head. And Argonaut. So Argonaut started right as the pandemic started. So at Millennium School, where I was before, we came to feel that of all the many experiments we tried, one of the best was how advisory worked there. That it really became like the beating heart of the school. It's one group, 8 kids with one teacher. You see each other every day, all 3 years of middle school. And when kids, walk across the stage on graduation day, they each give a little speech. 90% of them are about their advisory and what they've experienced together, how close they've become. And for middle schoolers, that sense of belonging is ground zero. That's the basis for whatever good will come from those years. So fast forward to the pandemic starting, everything's going online and going sideways. I wanted to offer that advisory experience to anyone, within our constraints, anywhere in the world by Zoom. And I thought it would probably be pretty frustrating on Zoom, but we should do it because we didn't have a choice. And lo and behold, while Zoom is limiting in many ways, it worked so much better than I thought. And I even started to realize that for a lot of middle schoolers, a space among peers, but where there isn't anyone from your school and it's not next to your classroom, had a freedom to it that was really helpful, where they could kind of shake off stories about them or their reputation or the way they feel kind of constrained and be more honest. It's social emotional learning, but taught experientially by having a group of similar age kids facilitated by a teacher who can talk about what is really mattering to them. A friendship drama, something they want to celebrate, stress they're feeling, questions about mental health. All of that is on the table and in a safe container where it's okay to talk about. So it's been super fun. It's continued, even after Zoom was no longer necessary, it's continued because now there are kids in, I think, 4 continents in the program. So they're scattered all over. It's a whole other fun thing is seeing kids in the same developmental stage, but totally different cultures making sense of kind of the same fundamental needs. So yeah, it's really one of my favorite things I get to do.
Very inspirational stuff again. I know I've said that word quite a few times and I'm gushing a little bit, Chris. I apologize, but these fantastic ideas and yeah, make me think about my own practices in the schools that I work in and with.
Well, we started by discussing the 50 challenges as sort of actionable things. These 50 things aren't happening in a vacuum. And it's likely a parent or an educator who's involved. And Chris, I really liked what you were just saying about the power of making the relationship in an educational context explicit through Argonaut. So that educational relationship, of course, is omnipresent in the school experience or in the child-parent relationship, but we don't always necessarily focus in on it because it's just sort of like the water we're swimming in. What is the potential power of things like these 50 adventures, not just for the student, not just for the parent to see their child or an educator seeing a student go through these challenges, but like a mutual shared understanding? Or what's the potential power in this work for the relationship of not just the person doing the adventure, but the person who's counseling alongside, or just a guide on the side, or just a support on the side as someone's gaining their independence and self-discovery through this?
Yeah. Yeah, when you asked that question, the first thing that came to my mind was so after I'd written the whole first draft, the kind of final boss editor of this book was my middle school daughter. And she tore into this book. And what I noticed after I kind of sorted through, my own mental days at everything she had just shredded was that anywhere in the book where I was using language that to me I thought was just kind of simple and to the point, but to her was a demand. Every single time I did that, she crossed it out. Space. You can't say that. You're telling me what to do. And I realized, how much what we take for granted giving orders, even when we're trying to do that in thoughtful and inquisitive ways. And how much of the middle school experience is a request to be trusted with more agency and to not be babied. So it's a very long way of coming back to your question about, I hope, first of all, that when we give this to a child, it is given without any demand. And if there is any possibility of demand, it's inviting them to demand something of us. So one of the I mentioned that an early version of this was a deck of cards. And what was so fun is how you could kind of, flip them to someone else and have a, student slip one to a friend or back to you as a teacher or parent and say, sure, I'll check this book out if you do this challenge and then give that to the adult. So I hope there's that playful spirit in it. And maybe, more broadly as kind of a point to sum up, I'm realizing a lot of different projects that I do kind of converge on the idea that we as adults have been trained to be instructors in so many ways. That's what we've seen modeled. It's often what we are explicitly taught to do. And rarely are we trained to be facilitators. And the two are really different mindsets, and they're both extremely valuable, but we really overuse the instructor mindset. We're just constantly stuck in thinking we've got to make everything a learning moment by our definitions. Instructors are very concerned about content, whereas a facilitator is concerned about conditions. How do I set the conditions to be right for something memorable to happen here, something really cool? So that is, I hope, what comes from this, that however you're playing with this as an adult, it can put us into the facilitative mindset. We can't control the outcomes. We don't even know which chapter they're going to choose, and it might be a flaming disaster, but that we position ourselves as facilitators. So we're curious, non-judgmental, helping to make connections that let them do what they want to do. I think if we can get into that role a little bit more through this book and then keep that going in other domains, it would be a huge victory.
There are so many things that I've enjoyed from this, but I'm curious, is there anything we haven't touched on in relationship to the book or in relationship to this work that you want to make sure gets mentioned?
I think I've probably flung open enough doors in the course of this conversation. I guess maybe I'll just reemphasize one aspect of that last point, which is that us getting to continue playing, to be weird, frankly, weird in the sense that we're all really quirky humans, to keep tinkering, to being a mess, to not expecting that we will always have it together, nor trying to maintain that fiction in front of students, which only leads them to be confused or not trust us. I hope that we can be playful and weird, and good tinkerers as a result of all this. I think we need that as adults, and kids deserve to see that modeled around them.
Yeah, I think, and if there's a call to action for me and maybe any educators listening, it's trying to find that space in our day and our curriculum to let kids do that. Yeah, looking forward to getting your book and trying it out, handing it out,
Awesome.
exploring. Yeah, thanks.
Thanks, Chris.
Thanks for the chat. Yeah.
Oh, thank you so much. This was really fun. I welcome your feedback on the book, and especially your students and kids' feedback on it. Well, thanks for having me.
Yeah.